My party's got to get out of the defensive crouch that has us thinking that we're in the minority on these issues. America is with us in demanding common sense gun safety.
Welcome back to Harvard. Isn't he good? Anyway, that's Buttigieg. That's Mayor Pete Buttigieg in Iowa this weekend calling for new gun control legislation. Well, the Democratic candidate showed unity in the wake of the massacres in El Paso and Dayton in demanding that President Trump and the Congress enact new gun laws. 16 candidates participated in a forum in Des Moines sponsored by Everytown for Gun Safety.
My friends on the debate stage have great ideas, which I support. We do not lack for great ideas. What we lack is the United States Congress to have the courage to act.
If McConnell wants to vote against gun safety legislation, let him vote against it. But reconvene the United States Senate.
It's not just about passing 4 pieces of legislation over there or changing 2 regulations over here. It's about reducing the deaths from gun violence.
They should be exposed. They should be exposed for what they refuse to do because they're being intimidated by the NRA.
Former Vice President Joe Biden there followed up on his appearance in Iowa with an op-ed in the New York Times on Sunday. Biden promised to ban assault weapons if elected, writing, "If we cannot rise to meet this moment, it won't just be a political affair, it will be a moral one. It will mean that we accept the next inevitable tragedy." Politico reports the unified response sends a clear signal that gun control is now front and center for Democrats in the race to beat Trump, writing, "Democrats this year, more so than during the last presidential election, have been buoyed on gun control by gains in state houses last year, by an internal weakening of the NRA, and by a groundswell of youth activism following the school shooting in Parkland, Florida in 2018. For more, I'm joined by Rob Acosta, national political reporter for The Washington Post, Adrian Elrod, former senior advisor to the Hillary Clinton campaign, and Sher Michael Singleton, Republican political consultant. I guess my question is this moment different, given all the confluing, coming together issues of the supremacy argument, the mass killing, the shooting of children, all this in the last couple of years? Is this going to change the fight lines between the NRA and the gun control people?
You know, Chris, here's why I think it's different, because of all the reasons that you just mentioned. And also, I think if you're Mitch McConnell right now, you're looking at some of those polls that show that suburban voters who you need to make sure that you yourself get reelected and that the Senate remains in Republican hands, those voters want to see background checks. They want to see gun laws strengthened. So I think in that context, it does matter. You've also got a chorus of 20-plus Democratic presidential candidates right now talking about
this. Okay, answer the question. Ready?
Yeah.
Cartoon question.
Okay.
Mitch McConnell. Is he Elmer Fudd or is he Bugs Bunny? Bugs Bunny was brilliant. Brilliant. Is he smart? Has he got a calculation here? And if so, is it time to give on the red flag at least?
Democrats don't think the red flag laws go far enough.
No, but is he willing to go that far?
I think he might be, but I don't think we see that as a cop-out. Democrats see that as a cop-out.
I agree with that,
so I think
but will he go that far? My question, will he give something for once?
I think he might try to.
Sir Michael, will he give something? Is it time for Mitch to give something?
I mean, I
throw
think,
a bone to the gun control people and the American people.
I mean, I think the president could back this. The president has 90%.
I'm asking about Mitch.
Let me finish. Has 90% approval rating with the party. If the president says I'm behind this, that gives the green light to the majority leader to say yes to increasing background checks, yes to closing the gun show loophole. I'm a gun owner. I think I'm okay with that. Yes to red flag laws. Again, I'm a gun owner. I shoot very regularly. I have a lot of friends who are NRA members. They support some of those common sense measures. And I think to Adrian's point about suburban women in particular, I think some of those positions would be sound enough for them to stick with the party.
You're a student of the president. Is it time for him to give an inch? And with him, McConnell.
Depends on what you mean by an inch.
Okay, red flag.
Let me start there. Based on my reporting today, red flag laws dead on arrival in the Republican-controlled Senate. You already have Senator Barrasso, a member of the leadership, saying he has due process concerns about it. So does Senator Ben Sasse, up for re-election in 2020. Red flag laws being championed by Senator Graham. He's talking to President Trump on the golf course about it, but unlikely to happen on Capitol Hill. The only game in town, if you want gun control, based on my conversations with top Republicans, Toomey Mansion. It's got to be revived. That's had a past history of getting
which basically moves, it doesn't threaten the NRA much, but it does widen the background check law, right?
It does.
Doesn't include gun shows.
The NRA has been weakened by the scandals with Wayne LaPierre. Listen to Rush Limbaugh's show on Friday. He spent hours saying that if the president moves on background checks, they know they're dealing with a president who's not ideological at the core, and that he may be looking for a win, especially as the trade deal stalls with China. And if he starts looking for a background check win, you already have people beyond the NRA trying to boost that gun rights activism and say they're telling this White House behind the scenes, don't move an inch. We're not going to give anything. And McConnell's play, I'm told, is to just let it peter out. Talk about being open to background checks.
Okay, here's the biggest question. You're a Democrat, but I think I will start with you. You're a Republican, you're a reporter. What's Trump more afraid of? Being too transigent in opposition to the gun control people and the American people, that he looks like he's pro-gun and pro-death, basically? Or is he more afraid of Rush Limbaugh calling him a traitor?
I think it's a toss-up. I think it's a toss-up, Chris, because, look, he's more fearful about losing his
Rush
base.
Limbaugh, is already calling him a traitor.
Sure, of course. And I also think that Donald Trump, in the back of his mind, knows that even if he tries to concede on background checks and go forward with that, he knows that even if the NRA, if 75% of NRA members support background checks, that it's still going to freak out his base. He is so
what's
scared.
he going to do? What's he more afraid of? The base? Is he more afraid of the NRA and Rush Limbaugh, or the majority of the American people? What's he more afraid of?
I think he's more afraid of Rush Limbaugh and his base.
I mean,
what's he more concerned about?
To my original point, if the president wants to stand behind some form of a measured reform, he certainly can, based upon his approval in the party.
Will he trust Limbaugh?
He could. I think he could. I think more voters would stand with the president than
I got to ask that,
Limbaugh.
Robert, your question. He says he would he'd fight with him.
Most Republican lawmakers, when you ask them what's the greatest organization to help you get out the vote, it's not the Republican National Committee, it's the NRA. And as they look at the suburban problem from 2018, they're saying we need our base with us in 2020. It's going to be very difficult. President Trump has to lean in and give his political capital to Toomey Manchin, or else it won't go anywhere, based on my conversation
with all due respect to Robert, I don't see how that's true. I've worked with the RNC when I worked on Gingrich's campaign, Romney's campaign, and even Ben Carson's campaign. And even after he dropped out and endorsed Trump, I do not believe the notion that the NRA has more clout than the Republican Party. That puts people on the ground.
The NRA has a strong ground game. They've had members who have been. The
NRA doesn't have a get out there
who have been five-generation members.
Here's my thought. My thought is the president will wait a couple weeks to decide this. He's going to wait and get close. He's got 4 weeks to play with this thing until the 9th of September. I think he'd like to not do anything. I think if he does Toomey Manchin, that might squeak by in Pennsylvania. But it still raises the question of the true gun people up in Pennsylvania. I know them well. I got a brother, one of these guys. I know them. And they're unforgiving, and they're always looking for traitors. The traitor is what they look for. And if they see Trump as a traitor, bye-bye Pennsylvania.
As Democrats, do they really want to deal with the president they're calling a white supremacist? They already have their own bill. A lot of Democrats are pressuring the leadership, saying, don't work with this president on a gun deal.
Maybe they don't want
come enough in our direction.
You see, they want the issue. The Democrats want the issue, too.
They want reform, but they don't want to just have a watered-down deal.
Okay. So nobody wants something just like the calling out to one person that shouldn't be getting a gun.
Well, the policies need to be proportionate. I mean, I've heard some gun activists on the Democratic side saying ban all assault rifles altogether. I'm not in support of that.
I'll tell you, I think the president's going to play it careful and in the end probably do nothing.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.